Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. Tsunami waves reached Hawaii after an 8.8 magnitude earthquake off Russia's coast, with a 4-foot wave recorded in Oahu. Millions in Japan, Russia and the US West Coast have been ordered to evacuate. Families of Israeli hostages in Gaza have condemned the UK's plan to recognise a Palestinian state, calling it. Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Canada will recognise a Palestinian state in September if Israel does not move towards a ceasefire, becoming the third G7 nation to do so. Prime Minister Mark Carney stressed the move depends on democratic reforms and elections without Hamas. Israel's foreign ministry rejected the announcement, calling it a reward for Hamas. President Donald Trump announces a 15% tariff on South Korean imports as part of a full and complete trade deal. The agreement includes a $350 billion investment by Seoul and a 50% tax on South Korean steel and aluminium exports. Chile evacuates 1.4 million people from its coast following an 8.8 magnitude earthquake off the east coast of Russia and a Pacific tsunami alert. The first tsunami waves have already hit the South American country, according to the Interior Minister. At least 48 Palestinians are killed and dozens are wounded while waiting for food at a crossing in the Gaza Strip, according to a hospital that received the casualties. The violence came as the US envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, arrived in Israel for talks. Hezbollah leader Sheikh Naim Qassem rejected calls for the group's disarmament once again, saying it would only serve Israel's interests. Qassem stated, "We will not submit to Israel," amid US pressure to remove Hezbollah's arsenal. The US has imposed sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandra de Moraes, who is handling the trial of former President Jair Bolsonaro. President Trump also announced a 50% tariff on most Brazilian imports, excluding key sectors such as aircraft and energy. US Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell defended the central bank's independence, stating it has served the public well. He emphasized the importance of making decisions based on data and risk balance rather than political pressure. President Donald Trump has said on Wednesday that trade talks with China are progressing well, anticipating a, quote, very fair deal. He expressed confidence that both sides are right in step and that the deal will work out positively. Now we start this hour in the United States, where President Trump announced a 15% tariff on South Korean goods, including a reduction in auto tariffs from 25%. South Korea had pushed for a 12.5% tariff. The deal includes a $150 billion shipbuilding fund, but no agreement on opening rice and beef markets. South Korea's Lee said the deal strengthens the alliance and levels the playing field for exports. The country will shift some LNG imports from the Middle East to the United States. However, no discussions were held on steel and aluminium tariffs. Now let's have a look at what the South Korean Chief Presidential Policy Secretary had to say.
주력 수출 품목인 자동차 관세도 15%로 낮췄습니다. 추후 부과가 예고된 반도체, 의약품 관세의 경우에도 다른 나라 대비 불리하지 않은 대우를 받게 될 예정입니다. 이번 합의에서 가장 주목할 만한 점은 미국과의 조선업 분야의 협력을 확대하기로 한 것입니다. 한미 조선협력펀드 1,500억 불은 선박건조, MRO, 조선기자재 등 조선업 생태계 전반을 포괄하며 우리 기업들의 수요에 기반해 구체적 프로젝트에 투자될 예정입니다. 미국과의 협의 과정에서 우리 농축산물 시장 개방에 대한 강한 요구가 있었던 것이 사실입니다. 그러나 식량 안보와 우리 농업의 민감성을 감안해 국내 쌀과 쇠고기 시장은 추가 개방하지 않는 것으로 합의하였습니다.
Now more in US trade. In talks with China, according to reports, Beijing expressed its commitment to resolving tariff issues through dialogue, despite deep-seated economic challenges. Both sides aim for a long-term solution, with China assuring sincerity in consultations. Despite challenges, China reaffirmed its commitment to consultations and finding a mutually beneficial solution. We're now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's a journalist from the Korea Herald. He joins us live from the South Korean capital. Dr. Kumar, thank you very much for joining us on the program. South Korea were originally facing a 25% tariff on their exports. They've managed to get it down to 15% with a huge investment expected in the United States along with the deal. They were originally advocating for 12.5%, half of that original tariff that was first announced in April. Is Seoul getting a win here in this deal with the United States?
The deadlock looks to be resolved for a moment, but it cannot be said that it is a win-win or a win for South Korea at least. Of course, South Korean president has said that we have come up and we have resolved a major hurdle because it has been perceived here that this deadline is going to, this deadline was creating hurdles for many Korean companies and the market as well, and there were many uncertainties. So in a sense, yes, this conclusion has been made, but if this conclusion does not go in right direction, when I say right direction, this means when it is well received by the public in Korea and the opposition in Korea, unless that happens, things will not be settled in Korea. This is the situation right now.
Dr. Kumar, the agreement sidesteps opening up South Korea's rice and beef markets. Why are these sectors so sensitive to Seoul?
See, President Donald Trump has used a comprehensive terminology like the agriculture products and agriculture in a broader sense. But in Korea, this is being seen not from a comprehensive angle. They want to confine to the products which are going to be affected, and rice and beef is very sensitive in Korea. Although $100 billion for LNG also had been a concern because South Korea's major import comes from the Middle East, so they have to be figured out as well that how it is going to work, because South Korea doesn't have huge demand. It has demands only for domestic consumption, which had been solved by the Middle East. So yeah, once again coming to the agricultural products thing, South Korea is not a big market, and especially the farmers had been struggling since decades, and they have always come up and protested against the South Korean government, not only for this US tariff thing, but they had been struggling because of many challenges, including the fertility rate here is down. Young generation is not interested in doing agriculture sector things, and already there is a labor shortage. So they had been facing challenges from decades, and if these tariffs come also, then it will affect the very common masses, especially the common. When I say common masses, this means the entire inflation would go high. Yeah.
Yes.
That is why it is very concerning for average Koreans and as well as the foreign residents who are living in Korea.
Yes, Dr. Kumar, do stay with us. When we move on, we stay in the Indo-Pacific next. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick announced that the United States has secured trade deals with Cambodia and Thailand ahead of President Trump's August 1st tariff deadline. In an interview, Lutnick revealed Trump brokered a truce between the two countries over the weekend, utilizing trade talks. Lutnick emphasized the global impact of Trump's trade strategy, stating that countries like the European Union, Japan, and the Philippines are paying as part of these efforts. He described the process as unbelievable and credited Trump's direct engagement in making these agreements possible. We're once again joined by Dr. Kumar to discuss. We're once again joined by Dr. Kumar to discuss this further. Dr. Kumar, we obviously saw this flare-up of hostilities between the two Southeast Asian countries come to an end with Donald Trump's announcement of a ceasefire brokered by Malaysia and also the United States. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, has said that this trade deal played a huge part in brokering peace between these two countries. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump utilizing trade to strike these peace deals?
From economic insecurity perspective, yes, it does play a role, but this had been a contested issue of a land dispute, and you know that both the countries had been in conflict for many times. This is not the first time. From one angle, yes, Trump has impacted. You know, no country in this world is now unaffected by President Trump's leadership and his actions and the decisions. So is the case with Thai-Cambodia conflict as well. But what is problematic here is that although the ceasefire has been agreed, but the allegations are still ongoing. So we cannot see it as a complete resolution. For complete resolution, I am reiterating once again that ASEAN chair, Malaysia, and the ASEAN 10 members plus one, including East Timor, 11, all these nations have to come up and agree on this ceasefire, as well as the stability aspect, because this is an ASEAN issue, and for ASEAN centrality and sustainability, inclusiveness, people prosperity, this stability is very important. So that is why in coming years, ASEAN chairmanship as well as the bilateral channels have to somehow resolve the issues and conventions such as Ottawa Convention and those issues and bone of contentions, yes, which is being raised by Cambodia also. So this should be seen as a short-term gain from President Trump, but for ASEAN, there is a need of long-term stability.
Yes, Dr. Kumar, thank you very much for your insight and joining us here on the program. We now move over to North America, where Canada intends to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations in September, according to Prime Minister Mark Carney. He said that his goal is to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. The announcement came after France said last week it would recognize a Palestinian state, and a day after, Britain said it would also recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations if the fighting in Gaza, part of the Palestinian territories occupied by Israel, had not stopped by then. Carney has said that the move was predicted on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to reforms, including commitments to fundamentally reform its governments and to hold general elections in 2026, in which Hamas can play no part. Here's what the Canadian Prime Minister had to say.
Pour ces raisons, le Canada a l'intention de reconnaître l'État de la Palestine lors de.
The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has welcomed Canada's historic move in recognizing the state of Palestine, as per the official Palestinian news agency. Meanwhile, Israel condemned Canada's plan and said that it represented a reward for Hamas and arms the efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, according to a statement by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Okay, we're now joined by Spencer Critchley. He's a communications strategist located in California. Thank you very much, as always, Spencer, for joining us here on the program. Spencer, Canada is now the third G7 nation to have announced something, the recognition of a Palestinian state. Britain and Canada, of course, this comes only if Israel don't step back its hostilities in the Gaza Strip and also let aid flow freely by September. How significant is this announcement by Canada? And do you think we could see a possibility of more G7 nations following in its footsteps?
I think it's significant from the point of view of symbolism and public opinion. It would be easy to dismiss both of those, but in fact, I think they're both quite important. Many Palestinian advocates would argue that there needs to be more direct pressure on Israel from nations who are arming Israel and continuing to arm it while it carries out what most of the leaders of those nations see as war crimes and atrocities now in Gaza. However, the extent to which longtime allies of Israel take moves like this communicates very strongly the message to the Israeli people, first of all, that their current leadership is turning Israel into an international pariah. And I think it's beginning to dawn on more and more Israelis. There are many who've been aware of this for quite some time, but I think it's beginning to dawn on more and more of them that the stories they're hearing about what's going on in Gaza are not necessarily accurate, and that Israel now finds itself in the position of committing the kinds of crimes against civilians that the state of Israel was founded to prevent from ever happening again. I say this with the deepest regret because I support the mission of the state of Israel as a liberal democracy, and I support liberal democracies in general, but the Netanyahu administration has long been betraying the principles of liberal democracy and acting very much like its enemy, which I think is something that has happened repeatedly in history, that once you declare that you have an enemy, the more bitter the enmity, the more like your enemy you end up becoming.
Spencer, what are your thoughts on some of the US's main alliances breaking with Donald Trump here? We, of course, saw just a couple of days ago, Keir Starmer announced the same thing just a day after meeting with Donald Trump. Donald Trump obviously condemned it directly after on Air Force One. What do you think will come of this? Some of the United States' closest allies possibly going against Donald Trump in regards to this issue.
Well, this also risks isolating the United States. And this is another area, similarly to symbolism and public opinion, which I think often get underweighted, is the basic morality of a foreign policy, which is sometimes dismissed as naive. But ultimately, if your foreign policy is not based on morality, I think it is ultimately on very, very weak foundations. And that's especially true in the modern era, as the world has moved away from international relations that were marked by endless conflict and war and endless pursuit of self-interest and scheming and betrayal. And that seemed for much of human history to be just the inevitable story of humanity. But things fundamentally changed after the horrors of the 20th century, and the world did make real progress following the end of World War II. It sometimes seems like we have not, but in fact, it's been one of the most peaceful periods in all of human history, which gives an indication of how bad previous human history was. And the reason for that was a moral awakening. The recognition, having faced the ultimate horror during World War II, not only of the Holocaust, but of the use of nuclear weapons, that humanity could not continue this way.
Spencer, apologies, just quickly, apologies for interrupting you. I'm just conscious of time here. Obviously, Mark Carney and Keir Starmer and also Macron have all said the same statement, that Hamas can have no part in governing a Palestinian state. How realistic is this expectation?
Well, I think it's important to make that demand. Hamas has already long since achieved pariah status, and I think has to be recognized for what it is, a vicious dictatorship, a criminal gang, and a death cult, essentially. It can have no role. It can achieve no recognition. And so I think that's an important point to make. Despite, I think, the rightful rejection of and horror at what Israel is doing right now, it's important not to establish some kind of equivalence as if Israel is exactly the same as Hamas. Israel is failing its own values to the extent it acts a little bit like Hamas, but Hamas is dedicated to the atrocities that Israel is committing now as a violation of its principles. Those are the fulfillment of the principles of Hamas.
Yes, Spencer Critchley, thank you very much for your insight, as always, in joining us here on NewsX World. We now move on, but stay in the region, where in Gaza at least 48 Palestinians were killed and dozens were wounded while waiting for food at a crossing in the Gaza Strip, according to reports from local hospitals. As this comes, US envoy Steve Witkoff is set to travel to Israel for talks on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel's military offensive and blockade have reportedly led to the worst case scenario of famine in the coastal territory of some 2 million Palestinians, according to local international authorities on hunger crisis. Meanwhile, the Egyptian Ministry of Defense airdropped humanitarian aid over Gaza. According to the statement by the Egyptian Ministry of Defense, 4 military transport planes took off from Egypt carrying tons of food supplies, which were dropped by parachute over areas inaccessible by land. The Gaza Health Ministry said that 154 people, including 89 children, have died of malnutrition in recent weeks. We're now joined by Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, who's a former Indian ambassador. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Sachdev. We are still hearing reports of Palestinians being killed while seeking aid. International pressure is building by the day on Israel for some of these reported actions where Palestinians seek aid and then receive Israeli fire. What are your thoughts on Israel's actions when it comes to this aid distribution?
Thank you, Thomas, for having me. It's a precarious and avoidable situation, totally man-made. I think Israel has to bear much of the blame for ruling out international agencies such as UNRWA or UN agencies, IFAD, etc., from distributing assistance to the beleaguered Gazans who have no other source for either food or medical supplies or other essential goods except through what Israel permits. In the recent days, Israel and the United States have relented, firstly by having an organization created for Gaza humanitarian relief, which has proven to be inadequate and inefficient. The number of centers created are far few and remotely located and have led to huge crowds, leading Israelis to fire on them apparently, and a large number of people have been killed. Those who have died of malnutrition and disease, lacking medicines and medical supplies, have also multiplied to this. To this end, Israel has recently, from 27th of this month onwards, allowed relief airdrops as well as some relief by road being permitted. But these are yet insufficient,
Yes.
and airdrops are not the permanent solution that can feed such a large number of people in diverse places. And they are inefficient, as
Yes.
your own television has shown. The airdrops are very often destroyed. The parachutes don't open, they go into the sea, etc., etc. So,
Ambassador
hopefully,
Sachdev, I'm really sorry to interrupt. You are staying with us to discuss further updates from the region. We will bring you all the updates when it comes to the Gaza conflict as we get them. However, moving on and staying in the Middle East, Lebanon's Hezbollah leader, Sheikh Naim Qassem, has accused US envoy Tom Barrack of intimidating Lebanon. In a televised address marking the first anniversary of the targeted killing by Israel of senior commander Fouad Shakur, Qassem said anyone calling today for the surrender of weapons, whether internally or externally on the Arab or international stage, is serving the Israeli project. He further said that Barrack is using intimidation and threats with the aim of aiding Israel. Let's in fact listen in.
جاء باراك بالتهويل وبالتهديد بضم لبنان إلى سوريا، وبالتهديد أن لبنان لن يبقى على الخارطة، وأنه لن يكون محل اهتمام العالم، مستخدما في الوقت نفسه العدوان والتهديد بتوسعة العدوان. هذا الزلمة بده السلاح من أجل إسرائيل، ما بده السلاح من أجل ضبط الوضع الأمني في لبنان. الحمد لله الوضع الأمني في لبنان على أحسن ما يرام.
Several reports that suggest that the US is pushing Lebanon to issue a formal cabinet decision committing to disarm Hezbollah, saying that it is needed before talks can resume on a halt to Israeli military operations in the country, which are still taking place despite a ceasefire agreed upon in November of last year. Under the truce, Hezbollah was to withdraw its fighters north of the Litani River, around 30 kilometers from the Israeli border. Hezbollah has publicly refused to hand over its arsenal in full. Qassem said that the US was demanding a removal of Hezbollah's missiles and drones for Israel's sake and not for Lebanon's security. In early July, Barrack met Lebanese officials in Beirut to discuss the disarmament proposal. It would see Hezbollah fully disarmed within 4 months in exchange for the withdrawal of Israeli troops occupying several posts in South Lebanon and a halt to Israeli airstrikes that have so far killed thousands of Lebanese nationals. We are once again joined by Ambassador Sachdev. Thank you very much once again for staying with us. The Hezbollah leader says that anyone calling for the Hezbollah group to disarm is serving the Israeli project. How does this framing resonate inside Lebanon, particularly among these rival factions?
Being an Arabic speaker, I could make out a lot of what more has Hezbollah leader said. He accused the American diplomat to try and merge Lebanon with Syria. And so on and so forth. But that is those are emotional remarks, and I think Israel has put conditions for removal from its forces from 5 observation points in southern part of Lebanon to disarming of Hezbollah and Litani River related withdrawal, as you mentioned. These conditions were not there in the ceasefire agreement to start with, but have come into being now. Hezbollah's refusal has a lot to do with Lebanon's own domestic situation and the decimation of Iranian assistance to Hezbollah which used to sustain it. So Hezbollah is now on its own. It doesn't get supplies from Iran.
Yes.
It doesn't get fund from Iran. So it is understandably reluctant to denude itself of the arsenal.
Ambassador Sachdev, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Apologies there, we had some technical issues. A pleasure to get your insight. However, we move over to South America now, where the tsunami warnings have been lifted across the Pacific Rim, allowing millions of temporary evacuees to return home after one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded hit off the coast of Russia. The 8.8 magnitude quake rattled Russia's sparsely populated Kamchatka Peninsula, triggering tsunami warnings and evacuations from Japan to the United States to Ecuador. The tsunamis caused widespread disruption. Peru closed 65 of its 121 Pacific ports, and authorities on Maui cancelled flights to and from the Hawaiian island. In Japan, almost 2 million people had been ordered to higher ground before the warnings were downgraded or rescinded. In Chile, authorities conducted what the Interior Ministry said was perhaps the most massive evacuation ever carried out in the country, with 1.4 million people ordered to high ground. However, Chilean authorities reported no damage or victims. We are joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow at the Hudson Institute, located in Tokyo, Japan, to discuss this further. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us, as always, on the program. What are your thoughts of the fallout of this earthquake? 8.8 magnitude, huge risks of tsunamis across the region. However, over 24 hours on now, there has been no reports of casualties, no reports of any injuries. What are your thoughts on the after effects of this tsunami, this earthquake, apologies?
This is simply fortunate because this international cooperation system led by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in the United States, located in Hawaii, it's indeed a very sophisticated system. When we remember what happened in 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami, the tsunami has happened and all of the coastal cities in Sri Lanka, India, Indonesia, everyone suffered big damage. So if the warning system is not exist, of course, same thing could happen repeatedly. So this time, because of this international warning system exists, so everyone evacuate. So economic damage related with evacuation is happened. But at the same time, compare with the more deteriorated, more big wave attacks the coastal cities at the same time, it is fortunate and the economic damage is minimum. So that's why, yes, the expectation is more than 3-meter tidal wave tsunami attacks the coastal cities. That is the reason the evacuation has happened. And the reality is, in case of Japan, the 1 meter, the 30 centimeter, in the Chile, the 70 centimeter, that is lower than the 3 meter. But still, this is fortunate. So that is the reason system is working, and warning is working, and economic damage is minimum. We should think so, I think.
Yes, Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.